Hi everybody! So today we're going to be, first off, welcome to the Bio 211 series live stream. This is week 4. We'll be talking about metabolism. These worksheets should be released if you'd like to do it along with me. So we're going to start with an experimental setup. This is asking, do chemical reaction rates increase with increased temperature and concentration? So, the figure shows data from an experiment designed to determine if chemical reaction rates increase with increased temperature and concentration. So, increased temperature and concentration. Students at Parkland College tested the effects of temperature and concentration on reaction rate separately. And the results are shown here. So, this is the concentration versus reaction rate. And this is the temperature versus reaction rate. So as we can see here, this is relating to the temperature right over here. And what they did was first they separately looked at how temperature and how concentration affect. So when looking at just temperature, they have different flasks that are at different increments of degrees Celsius. So in order to keep this consistent and just test temperature, they would have the same amount of concentration in each of these flasks, but they would just be increasing temperature to see how that affects the reaction rate. What they found down here is that an increased temperature increases a reaction rate, or can increase a reaction rate. Separately, they had 3 different concentrations: low concentration, medium concentration, high concentration. They tested these to see their reaction rates. So this is irrespective of temperature. As you can see here, they're all kept at 23 degrees Celsius. So this lets them measure specifically how concentration is affecting the reaction rate. What they found down here was in treatment 3, so this was high, this was medium, and this was low. So as we can see here, this is a much greater difference than what medium could achieve. So they deduced that 1, higher temperature can increase reaction rate, and 2, higher concentration can increase reaction rate. So what this is telling us now that we have this all explained and set out is you are a lab technician at biotech company and need to determine the fastest way to make large quantities of HSO. How would you design an experiment to test the combined effects? This is just showing the non-combined effects, so the separate effects of temperature, separate effects of concentration. So how would we test the combined effects of temperature and concentration on a reaction rate in order to optimize the production process? So what we want to include in our experimental design, and things that are very important, and let me make sure that you can see all of this, great, are controls, replicates, and concentration and temperatures of the reactants. And it says that up here. So what we'll want to do is also have a predicted hypothesis and null hypothesis. A hypothesis is what we expect to happen, and a null hypothesis is kind of the anti. So for example, we're starting with hypothesis. It's a little small, I'll start writing bigger. What we want to say, of course we can come up with a bunch of different things. What I'm going to say, seeing that both increased concentration and increased temperature separately can increase reaction rate, I would assume that those coupled would increase the reaction rate. So my predicted hypothesis is that chemical reaction rates will increase, and this is just to denote increase, with increased temperature and concentration. I will say, in my predicted though, that this will not go on forever. There will be an optimal temperature and an optimal concentration where eventually the reaction rate is going to level off. So at a certain point, the reaction rate will level off. And this is termed as an asymptote. 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 It's a mouthful. Great. Okay. So this is our hypothesis. And if our null hypothesis is the anti, we would say chemical reaction rate is not affected by increased temperature and concentration. So when we're also looking at things like control, we want to be able to deduce how temperature and concentration are affecting. So what we can do is have a flask, because that looks like a great flask, that has room temperature and the same concentration throughout the experiment. If we have the same temperature and consistent concentration, then when we change the temperature and concentration, we will also be able to detect those more accurately, knowing what our control looks like. So for temperature, we will test reaction rate in 10 flasks each and 10 replicates per treatment at regular temperature intervals of 5 degrees C, from -1 to 50 degrees Celsius. So this also includes our control, that 10 flasks will be at room temperature and act as a control. For concentration, we can replicate the experiment that we saw here. And this is a better representation of how we can see these are multiple flasks in each row, which is what we'll be simulating. So from figure 8.4, we can use the same 3 concentration variations, the low, medium, and high. And we're going to be using 10 replicates of that each. So this is just denoting that there are 10 replicates. Those are replicated flasks. In order to test the combined effects, the 3 concentration levels, these 3, will be tested at the temperature intervals from the range of -1 to 50 degrees. So there's going to be 10 of these each. We're going to have 3 little flasks. Oh my gosh. 3 little flasks. Each times 10. And we've already established the control. And this will have low concentration, medium, and high, similar to the one that we saw right here. And on these 3 flasks, we are going to be increasing the temperature of 5 intervals for each of them. So this one's going to go through the same temperature interval as this one and this one. And our expected results we can graph. So I'm going to just delete this and make room for a graph so I can show you guys. And this is going to be a rough graph. I don't have a ruler on me. So we'll have the bottom denoted by temperature in Celsius. And don't forget to put units. And then here we have our reaction rate. So this is obviously going to be 50 degrees. And in the key that is released, you'll be able to see this a little bit more clearly. But basically on this reaction rate, this is higher, lower. We're starting from 0 on both ends. And this graph will have 3 lines to denote the 3 concentrations we're looking at. So we'll use a circle dot to demonstrate low, square, or maybe instead of shapes we can use colors. That might be easier to watch. So we'll just do red as low. Green as medium. And I'm so sorry for those with red-green color blindness. I will make it very clear. And this is high. So when we're starting with our low concentration, we're going to be starting not at a 0 reaction rate. We do have some concentration, so it will never start at 0, but we'll just be starting a little bit down here. As we move along the graph, we see that as temperature is increasing, our reaction rate for the low concentration is increasing. But when we compare this to medium, which we said was green, medium is going to be starting already at a higher reaction rate level than low because we have more things to work with. And we'll see with this, it's increasing much more rapidly. But we get to this interesting point right here where it levels off. And this is basically telling us that no matter what we increase the temperature or substrate concentration further, this is the max point that we can reach. We cannot go higher than that. So for high concentration then, we're still starting relatively high, and this increase, though seeming to follow medium at first, has a much larger reaction rate. This too will level off eventually, because that is the optimal reaction rate, and we can't move above that. So, with the low concentration rate, as we said, it does not level off, but with medium and high, the concentration rate levels off around the same time. It levels off around, let's just say 40 degrees down here. So it eliminates the benefit of increasing temperature further. So as 40 degrees is kind of where it's capped. It doesn't matter if it's 60, 70, 100 degrees. 40 degrees is where it levels off, so temperature can no longer have an effect, is what that's saying. So what we'll do with this, and talking about how temperature and reaction rate and things like that, we're going to move into energy transformation. So this was a good review on how to set up a hypothesis, null hypothesis, understanding your controls, and understanding your parameters. So I hope that that part was beneficial. And so now we're going to move toward energy transformations. So, to maintain life, organisms must be able to convert energy from one form to another. Using photosynthesis as an example, photosynthetic prokaryotes use energy from the sun to convert CO2 and water into glucose and oxygen. So the summary can be found right here. This is the reaction of photosynthesis. And as we can see, this is carbon dioxide, water, glucose, oxygen, as said before. So this type of reaction is called an oxidation, reduction, reaction, or redox. That's just the summation of the two. So with oxidation reduction, oxidation is the loss of hydrogen ions or protons. Reduction is the gain of protons. This is not the first time I'll be saying this in the stream, so I'll just leave it at that for now. But just remember that as we're moving forward. So when we move on to the next page, what this is asking for up here is whether or not the reaction of photosynthesis is anabolic, catabolic, and endergonic or exergonic. So as we saw, CO2 plus water. Oh. I want this to be accurate. 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O. Those numbers are important, I swear. H12O6 plus 6O2. Great. So, anabolic refers to building. Anabolic means that we're taking simple molecules and we're building it into something more complex. Catabolic means that we're taking complex molecules and we're breaking it into something simple. To remember catabolic and anabolic, I don't have an analogy for anabolic, but for catabolic I like to think of cats. And cats like to destroy things. Animals do, but they just have sharper claws for it, so I think they're more efficient at it. So I like to think of cats, catabolic reaction, breaking something down. These have a relationship with endergonic and exergonic. Endergonic means that it requires an input of energy. Endo, I'll write this here, endo, in, exo, out. So endergonic reactions require an input of energy to proceed. Exergonic reactions release energy at the end of their reaction. So in this case, looking at this reaction up here, we would classify this as an anabolic and endergonic reaction. We're taking simple molecules, building it into something bigger, and because anabolic reactions generally are endergonic because you require energy to build something. If we use ATP as an example, going from ADP and PI to ATP requires an input of energy. It requires energy to do that, so it's endergonic. Similar to photosynthesis, it's an endergonic reaction. Great. And so, in redox reactions, as we were saying earlier, electrons and associated H+ ions are transferred from one compounder to another one. So if one compounder element loses electrons, as we said above earlier, it becomes oxidized. And because it's losing electrons, those electrons need to go somewhere. And so where it goes, that compound is reduced. So whatever compound grabs those ions is reduced. So in photosynthesis, water becomes oxidized. So we can see here that we're going from 6, I shouldn't say 6, it's technically 12, but we're going from hydrogens nonetheless to no hydrogens present here. And I'll use a different color so you guys can see that a little better. So there are no hydrogens here. There are hydrogens here, there are no hydrogens there. Because of that loss, it's oxidized. So, and the electrons it loses in the process are reduced. The electrons it loses in the process reduce CO2 to glucose. So we see here, there's no hydrogens associated with carbon dioxide. Oh, sorry guys. Let me move this down for you. There's no hydrogens associated with CO2, but there's a lot of hydrogens associated with glucose. So because this one has hydrogens and this one does not, we would say it's reduced. It's gained hydrogens. Great. So now we're moving back into anabolic and catabolic, and we're just honing in those terms a bit more. So we said that anabolic reactions build more complex molecules. To do this, they require energy input. Remember we said endo is in. So therefore the input of energy is termed endergonic reactions. Endergonic reactions. Great, so now we're going to look at aerobic respiration, which you can see here is the reverse complement of photosynthesis. So instead of CO2 and H2O making glucose and oxygen, glucose and oxygen are now being broken down, catabolized into carbon dioxide and water. So this set of reactions are broken down into simpler ones. So glucose is broken down and becomes oxidized or reduced. So glucose has hydrogens here, no hydrogens here. Losing is oxidation. And the oxygen, right here, becomes reduced to water because of this gain in hydrogens. So a lot of this is repetition. The more practice you get, the easier this will get, and the terms will become more organic too. I understand sometimes it can be hard to dissociate the two, but just practice, and I'm sure that you guys will do fantastic. So, though this is getting redundant, I think it's good to, like I said, repeat this. So let's just go through this one more time. Anabolic and catabolic reactions break down more complex molecules into simpler ones. Catabolic, cats break things down. Reactions that release energy and can be used to do work. So released, we said out. We're releasing it, it's going out. Exergonic. So those are exergonic reactions. So therefore, aerobic respiration is a catabolic process and is exergonic. So I hope that makes sense. So going further, and now we're honing in specifically on aerobic respiration, which is, as we said, a catabolic and exergonic. So it releases energy. We can use these terms to discuss spontaneity within reactions. So here, exergonic reactions are said to be spontaneous. So what that means is that, what spontaneous means is that it basically just doesn't require an input of energy to occur. And though in our body systems, like all chemical reactions require some input of energy, but for an endergonic reaction versus exergonic, it's going to endergonic reactions are going to require a lot greater input than a spontaneous exergonic reaction. So spontaneous reactions rarely occur spontaneous because all chemical reactions, even those that release energy, require some addition of energy and the energy of activation before they can occur. Energy of activation. So one way of supplying this energy is to add heat, which is, as we saw here, that increased temperature increased the reaction rate. And so here, let me make this a bit more clear for you. So I have this diagram here, and I know that it's a little bit messy, but here we're seeing a spontaneous reaction, and here we're seeing a non-spontaneous reaction. The spontaneous reaction, this is the activation energy. This hump is what these reactant needs to go over in order to get down to these products. And because the products are at a lower energy than the reactants, as denoted by this right here, we would say that this is release of energy. This is exergonic. In green, we can see that the activation energy is lowered. So we said that this could be increased, this could be done by increased temperature, but this could also be done by enzymes, by catalysts, things that are very good at making things more efficient. So enzymes are pretty fascinating. And if you guys go into biochemistry or in your upper division bio classes, you'll learn a lot about enzymes, and they're really, really cool. Basically what enzymes do is they lower the activation energy enough to make the reaction more efficient. It makes it more readily able to go over. So if you're climbing Mount Everest versus a small molehill, it's going to require a lot less energy for you to walk over the molehill than it will to climb Mount Everest. Basically what enzymes do is make it so that you only have to climb molehills. So now that we have those diagrams and we're understanding activation energy a little bit better, we can go ahead and start reading this more. So one way of supplying energy is to add heat, like we said, and one worldly example is written down here is heating a marshmallow over a flame. So after enough heat is added, it's going to overcome that activation energy, and the sugar is going to react by oxidizing. So that's what we see when it's burning, or it's smoking, because I always burn my marshmallows. I never get that golden brown as I desire. So when enough heat is added to overcome the activation energy, the sugar and the marshmallow reacts by oxidizing. The marshmallow will continue to burn even if you remove it from the campfire. It's already gone over that activation energy. It's already pushing forward in the reaction, so that's why it continues to burn even when you're finished. So as the marshmallow burns, CO2 and water are formed as products of the reaction, something that we saw up here, which was also an exergonic reaction. So the energy that was stored in the bonds of the sugar is released as heat. So as heat increases, it's breaking those bonds down, and breaking those down, catabolic reaction, it's releasing energy as it does so. So that's why it says that when the bonds are broken, the sugar is released as heat. That is what is the form of energy is released in heat. So heat is what the energy is. Of course, in our bodies, we can't always use heat. Our bodies work at a very optimal temperature. And so what we do, as I said earlier, is we use catalysts and enzymes to lower the activation energy. This does not require an input of heat. So enzymes do a really good job of lowering activation energy, and they don't require heat. You can think about increasing temperature, adding enzymes, adding catalysts. Those are all three different categories that all can decrease activation energy. It's important to remember that some of this energy is still released as heat in our body, but the rest of that energy is converted into other forms that can be used, like ATP. So when we're releasing energy, we're releasing ATP, and that's awesome for us because we can use that ATP to do other things that we need to do. Run, walk, eat, all that stuff. And yeah, so that brings us to the end of this worksheet. To summarize what we've been through, we talked about creating a experimental setup and discussing the relationship of concentration and temperature on reaction rate. We said that when we increase temperature and we increase concentration, then reaction rates will increase. And we saw that exemplified here. We also saw that at a certain point, the reaction rate levels off and it's at its optimal rate. Then we moved to energy transformations. We talked about photosynthesis being an anabolic endergonic reaction where it is using energy to build more complex molecules. Using energy, endergonic, building molecules, anabolic. We then moved on to talk about the respiration we do in our bodies, aerobic respiration, and that is a catabolic, breaks down glucose into simpler molecules, catabolic reaction. And catabolic reactions are exergonic. They release heat. They are exergonic. They're releasing energy. Exergonic reactions, we said, were spontaneous, and that even spontaneous reactions require this activation energy that they need to get over. And so, even spontaneous reactions require just a little bit of energy input, but not nearly as much as endergonic reactions. We related this to how it works in the real world with burning sugar. We also talked about how it works in our bodies and how we use catalysts and enzymes to generate, we use catalysts and enzymes to lower activation energy in order to generate ATP. So when we're releasing that energy, it can come in forms of heat, and it also releases useful forms such as ATP that we can use to drive further endergonic anabolic reactions. We can use that energy that we released to be inputted into reactions that need an input of energy. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope that this gives you guys a better idea of metabolism and energy transformations in general. I also hope that you guys had a good time understanding and learning how to set up a experiment, how to get a hypothesis, a null hypothesis. So yeah, that was the end of this week's live stream. I hope to see you guys next week, and I hope that you guys have a really great day. So thank you guys so much.